But her second novel, Vivaldi's Virgins, does anyone have a copy of it here that you can hold up in the back of the room? Well, it is still in print and very popular with book groups, but it also has more than been optioned. It is in process to become a mini series. And perhaps Ruthie will ask you a little more about it. Okay. So, and some of you may have already read it in your book group, but it's going to be a 6-part mini series, and that is underway. So that's very exciting. So Barbara's written book reviews and essays and articles, and her writing's been in the New York Times book review section, in Newsweek, in Ms. Magazine, in the LA Times, in the Chronicle. But I think it's interesting. We just had dinner with her, and I'm going to say I think she feels very passionate about writing poetry. So maybe we can have her back sometime about poetry. Anyway, tonight, Ruthie Thornburg from our Sweet Thursday team will interview Barbara Quick about her latest novel, What Disappears. So welcome, Barbara and Ruthie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're excited to be back in person. I know we did our first one in September, but I still just really appreciate being able to do this with a live audience. It makes such a difference. Can you all hear me okay? Just want to make sure. Okay. Come a little closer. Is that better? Okay. Thank you, Dorothy. So we just had a chance to spend a little bit of time together, and all of us learned a lot about Barbara, and a very interesting background. And I think you'll learn about that and how she applies it to her writing as we go through the evening. But I thought it would be fun to start with just a short reading from Barbara. I think hearing part of the story come through the voice of the author is always sort of a treat. So with that.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. Is this volume, is it fine? So this novel has had a very, very long gestation, over 40 years. It started as my pre-first novel when I was a mere stripling of 21. And it started out as a very different kind of novel. Only the Russian part of the novel was begun. And it came from the same place as a poem that I wrote also very early on that I'd like to recite for you. It's called Crow's Feet. Great-grandmother came to me in a dream, in her hands a needle and thread. Don't believe what they tell you about angels, my child, she whispered in Russian. Just then, I noticed her wings, glossy black against the lace curtains. I am the weight of your mother and your mother's mother. I am the tongue grown heavy with silence. Her feet were tiny and pale, cloud-like. She placed one each upon the corners of my eyes, and I slept, the smell of feathers in my nostrils. And when I woke, there were crow's feet at the corners of my eyes, a breath of the shtetl over the bed, and black feathers everywhere.
Whoa. Okay, if you have not read the book, I'm just going to tell you that really does have a lot of elements that are in this story. I can see why you picked that as a way to introduce us to your writing and your style. That's beautiful. Very, very nice.
That was my maternal great-grandmother, who I called Nana. She was quite taciturn, but I would ask her a lot of questions, and her inevitable answer was, "Who remembers?" But I would worm things out of her until she told me these amazing little bits of stories from Kishinev, where she grew up. The smell of the bakery that she would pass every day, the smells in her mother's kitchen, the kiss she received from the handsome Yasha, the pharmacist's son, who was bound for medical school, and how he kissed her under the street lamp.
Yeah, it's fine. The problem was
No,
at the
what
beginning
happened?
because the lady.
No, what happened?
It was Yasha speaking. He kissed her under a street lamp in the snow, and my Nana never forgot about that kiss. I mean, Yasha was not my grandfather, but Nana would say, "Oh, Yasha's kiss," And my grandfather, when he was angry at her, he would say, "Why didn't you marry Yasha?" So I was able to work the story of Yasha and my grandmother into this book and change it, of course, because that's what we do when we write fiction. We get to be God and, make things up, make things turn out differently and make them turn out better. And I made myself Argentinian. So instead of doing Afro-Brazilian dance in Sonoma County, I would be doing the tango in Buenos Aires. I would like to read a scene from early on in the book in Kishinev, which describes the birth that sets the events of this novel into motion. The date is 1880. Nadia Luria held her squirming newborn baby girl on her chest, amazed that such a minuscule creature could have made her swell up so, bigger than she'd been with Lev, Faya, or Daniel. She was so much tinier and more delicate than any of them, with long-fingered, graceful hands, damp tendrils of hair, bright blue eyes, pink cheeks, and a lusty cry. She looked perfect, and yet something felt wrong, something beyond the ominous sounds coming from the shop through the bedroom door, a discomfort from deep inside Nadia's body. Her breathing quickened. Sweat broke out on Nadia's forehead while the midwife cut the cord and tended to the baby. Whatever it was felt like a mistake, as if time had run backwards and Nadia was starting to go through labor again. The midwife mopped at the blood between the mother's thighs, gently pressing on her belly. She bent down to take a closer look. Raised male voices could be heard from the next room, punctuated by the ringing sound of objects crashing to the floor. Nadia prayed it wasn't the pair of Sabbath candlesticks her grandmother had carried with her all the way from Poland and God knows where before that. Her limbs shook as if with fever. "Listen to me, Nadia," said the midwife. "There's a second baby. You have to push it out." "A second baby?" The sounds from the next room were growing louder and more frightening. Nadia felt a stab of pain in her belly, just as if one of those Cossacks out there had stabbed her with a knife. "Misha!" she wailed. The midwife spoke into Nadia's ear. "Push, little rabbit." Nadia tried to push, but the pressure only got worse. She was drenched in sweat, her mind racing. What had God been thinking, giving her twins? She heard a loud crash that could only be one of their sewing machines hitting the wooden floor. How would she manage alone with 5 children now if something happened to her husband? "Push, Nadia." Nadia bore down with every ounce of strength she could find in her body, beyond anything that seemed right or safe or tolerable. She heard her own screams filling the room. It felt as if a flaming knife were cutting her open, as if she were a lamb being slaughtered. She could feel blood flowing out from between her thighs. Too much blood. Was she dying? Push! Nadia made a final grunting effort, her eyes rolling back in her head, the room suddenly silent, and then the pressure was gone. Sound rushed back to her ears again. She tried to look over her belly to see the second baby, but she was too weak. There was no new baby cry announcing its presence in the world. Was it a boy? Another girl? Had she given birth to a corpse? She heard the little bell above the door of their shop, followed by the sound of muted male voices, the whinny of horses outside, the crack of a whip, sleigh bells, and then silence, punctuated by the crackling of the fire in the stove. The room flickered with shadows cast by the candlelight. Nadia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why have you turned away from me?" she said to the midwife, adding faintly, "Oi, Gewalt, what will become of us?" Where were her babies? Where was Misha? Exhausted beyond all endurance, Nadia was overpowered by the need to sleep.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you so much for that. It's a treat, as I said before, to have an author read in their voice. You bring the story so alive. So thank you for sharing that with us.
That's a pleasure.
So you've set this book in 2 locations, and over different years. You sort of go in and out of time a bit when you're telling the story. It moves back and forth as, we learn more about the different characters. But the main story are these 2 sisters. So can you tell us about the 2 sisters and how they were separated?
Yes. Well, the one sister, the one who was born first, who was taken for dead, who was born blue and cold, she was wrapped in the same blanket by that canny midwife as the other girl. And the midwife tended to the mother, changed the sheets and mopped up the blood and put the babies by the stove, expecting to find one live baby in a corpse. But when she unfolded the blanket, she found 2 babies as pink as geraniums. They were alive, and one had put her arm around the other and saved her sister. I actually got this idea by an image I saw on the internet of the hug of life that was given by one twin to another, saved her twin. I mean, it really happened. So I was very inspired by this story, and to my mind, it made a very special bond between these sisters. But the mother, whose husband was arrested for, trumped up political crimes in Tsarist Russia at the time, he was taken off to Siberia. She was left alone with now 5 children. Couldn't manage. She was a seamstress. Couldn't manage to feed. They were starving to death. And women from the Ladies' Aid Society suggested, well, put your baby girls in an orphanage so you can tend to your 5-year-old, who was very, very bright, and the rabbi had singled him out as having particular promise. Put the babies in the orphanage. It'll just be a temporary measure until you're able to make enough money to support all your children. And the mother didn't want to, but one day she woke up with dark circles under her eyes, starving. The children were all crying from hunger. And she knew she had to do it. She brought the baby girls, 6 months old, to the orphanage and told the matron they are not to be adopted. They must stay together, and you must wait for me. Well, then the matron was called away on family business. The assistant matron was in charge, and a French couple came to the door. A French couple, and the wife was 38 years old, had had 3 miscarriages, had not managed to bring a child to term, had had a Jewish grandmother from Kishinev, and she thought, magical thinking, if I adopt a baby from Kishinev, it will be the child I was meant to have, a baby girl. Comes to the orphanage with her husband, sees the 2 baby. One is awake, looks up at her, sees the magenta brooch on her jacket and smiles. And the woman starts to cry. She picks this baby up and holds it and says, "Oh, my darling, here's our little baby. Can't we take them both?" And the other baby, meanwhile, sees what's happening and starts screaming with this horrible sound. And the husband, who doesn't want to adopt a child at all, says, "One is enough. We must leave." And they leave. They leave the other baby behind. And that's Sonia, who has heard that she was born at the same time as an identical twin, but was told throughout her childhood that the twin died. On her deathbed, her mother tells her the child lived, but by mistake, she was adopted by a couple from France. And Sonia makes it her life's work to find her sister, And I'll tell you a little bit more about that story later, but that is that the story, the book opens in Paris, in the Théâtre du Châtelet, where the Ballets Russes is rehearsing a new program. And Anna Pavlova, who has this wonderful Russian seamstress, Sonia, who's supposed to be repairing her costume, has sent her maid out to fetch Sonia because she needs to go on in just 15 minutes and the costume hasn't shown up. And the maid goes out, and in the dressing room, she finds Sonia, she thinks. It's actually one of the extra dancers, a French woman, Jeannette Dupré, who's getting into costume, not yet. She's still in her street clothes. And the Russian maid just says, "Anna Pavlova," and drags her out to the dressing room. And Jeannette, who's been a minor dancer all this time, full of aspirations, but has never gotten a break. She's thinking, "Oh my God, this is my moment. Anna Pavlova has seen me rehearse. She thinks I'm good. She sees something special in me. And now she wants to see me. She's going to offer me some bigger part." And so she comes to the door. The maid knocks on the door. Anna Pavlova says, "Entrez." And Jeannette makes her most beautiful balletic bow to her idol, the brilliant dancer, Anna Pavlova. And all that happens is Anna Pavlova comes up to her, shakes her shoulders, and practically spitting in her faces, "Where is my costume, Sonia?" And so, standing next to her in that moment, Sonia has just come with the costume. They both see that everyone is staring at them. And finally they turn and they look at each other. Sonia faints. They're absolutely identical. Jeannette has had no idea that she was adopted, that she's Jewish, that she's Russian, that she had a twin. So one twin is just delighted beyond anything, and the other is absolutely horrified.
Interesting. Yes. Oh, great. Well, talking about these 2 girls, and you described this meeting, and that does emphasize their differences. One knew she was a twin, one does not, but their differences are so expanded just by the fact that one grows up in Russia, she grows up and becomes a tailor or a seamstress. The other lives in France and is raised a Catholic. And I just would like you to talk a bit about how these 2 experiences have developed these characters and how, their differences have really spawned as a result of that.
Absolutely. Well, in the book, the narrative goes back and forth between the 2 girls in their very different upbringings. And for Jeannette, whose adoptive mother was wonderful and adored her, the mother died scarlet fever when Jeanette was 8. And suddenly she became, the one in the family that no one wanted, because there was a rumor about her tainted relative, even though her father had sworn to the mother he'd keep it secret. And so Jeanette can't figure it out. What's wrong with me? And why don't I look like any of my cousins? Why didn't I look like my mother? Why do they look at me like there's something dirty about me? She can't figure it out, and she's just grieving because her beloved mother has died. Her aunt, her father's sister, who's, pretty awful and is always talking, behind Jeanette's back about Jeanette. Her aunt decides to enroll the child in a ballet school. She does that. And Jeanette finds her people. She finds a world in which she can belong. So she takes to it. She takes as many ballet classes per week as her family allows her to take. They think it's rather scandalous. Ballet dancers are not people in this time who any decent family would allow their son to marry. She doesn't care about that. She wants to dance. It's in her. And for Sonia, Sonia is in the world of costuming, and she's not particularly graceful like her sister is. They do look just alike in all the important things, but the way they move through the world is very different, and yet they have the same favorite color, magenta, as twins often do. And unfortunately for them, they become romantically involved with the same man in Paris, the king of fashion, a real person, an amazing person named Paul Poiret, who gave these epic parties. He was famous for his parties and left copious memoirs and records of his conversations. So he was very easy to write about. He was, I learned, do you know who Robert McKee it was? He wrote a wonderful book called Story. He was a movie guy. But just to reward myself, I took a weekend seminar with him about story. And the thing that he said that stuck with me is, you've got to love your villains. And I really drew on that for Vivaldi's Virgins. There's a villainous nun and teacher named La Befana, who is so awful. She's so evil and horrible, but she's complex and nuanced, and you feel why she became, the way she became. And in this, Paul Poiret, although, he's kind of like a Harvey Weinstein, he's so cold-hearted. He's involved with both these women. He knows that one is desperately looking for the other. He knows that the other knows nothing about the other, but he refuses to say anything about it. He's just enjoying it because it's so interesting to him. So I loved writing his character. It was just loads of fun. And I don't know, I'm a Gemini, and I don't really believe in astrology at all, but there was something about the divided character, the divided self that I could really identify with. And Jeanette is definitely the bitchier character. She's kind of bitter. She's tried so hard as a ballerina. At the age of 29, she knows, it's done for her. And she's had all these abortions. She's probably never going to be able to have a child. She doesn't have a patron. She's thought all this time that Paul Poiret would marry her. And it's not going to happen. And she's living in a crummy little cold water flat. She's suffering.
She's run away from her family in order to dance.
She has.
Yeah, so
She
she's
has
made a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought about in reading this book is, imagine if they had not been separated. What would their lives have been like?
Yes.
It would have been fascinating if these two had actually grown up together.
No, that's a wonderful question and comment. I thought about that a lot. And actually, Sonia fantasizes about it a lot. If only my sister had lived, if only, because Yasha invites her to go to his sister's wedding in Argentina, offers to send her a ticket. She thinks, well, I'd love to do that. I love Yasha, but how can I do that? You know, what, in what capacity? As a friend, as a, this would be improper. But if only my sister were still alive, she could accompany me. We would be safe together.
Yes. And she feels an emptiness because she's, and I think her mother confirms for her when she admits that this sister lived, she feels this emptiness and she always thinks it's because she doesn't have that sister with her.
Yeah, and really in my mind as the novelist, I've got to say, I think it's really because of those 5 months that they spent in the orphanage. That's got to do something to a person's psyche. And then when she learns that they were put in the orphanage and that her older brother wasn't, it's like, what, why, and I say in the book that in the currency of families at this time, girls are silver and boys are gold.
And that was one of my questions too, is just the mother makes these decisions about the siblings, Sonia's siblings, well, it's both of theirs, but really the Russian family, side of the family, with all of her children. And it just seems, I don't know, to me, it just seemed like, were these the right choices? And I know they were hard choices, but one son she helps get to America. One son who was very brilliant, she helps him get his education so that he can become a lawyer someday. And then the other daughter just kind of, I don't know, it just seemed to me it was a little bit, did these decisions serve the family?
Well, how can we ever know? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, as a parent, how can you know that it's the right decision? As a person, you come to a parting of the ways and you choose one path. How can you know that it's the right path? Maybe it is the right path just because it's the path you've chosen, but how can we know? I mean, it's the sort of thing that keeps us awake at night, right? Well, should I have stayed with him? We can't know. I mean, none of us are far enough away from the earth, to have the perspective of the tree, to look down and, oh, of course, it's clear. We don't know. But maybe our mistakes are some of our wisest choices.
Probably, or we learn from them, hopefully. Right?
Yeah.
Hopefully we do. So I have another question for you. Which sister do you relate to the most?
Well, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky answer because the one I want to say I am most like is the wonderful, patient, loving, empowering Sonia. Not the bitchy, selfish, ambitious Jeanette. But, I'm both.
Okay.
I mean, busted.
Well, you have to know what you're writing about. So there you go. You have a little bit of both.
Yeah. And also we have to, they say Flaubert took poison, in order to write Madame Bovary and get it just right. So, I've had to try being kind of bitchy sometimes, just to make sure I understood this feeling.
This is just a test.
Research.
Yes.
Research.
So another interesting thing in the story is about Sonia's 3 daughters.
Yes.
And I'd like for you to talk about them. The eldest one is responsible and artistic and kind.
Naomi.
And then Olga, the middle, she's very much a feminist.
Yes.
And she's something of a rebel. She's always ready to stand up for an underdog, or she has kind of her own way of thinking, and off she goes. And then the baby follows in the dancing.
Yeah,
So,
Bella.
Yeah. So could you talk about those 3 girls and where do these uniquenesses take them?
In the book.
Well, yes.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Naomi, it's a bridge to Paul Poiret and his fashion empire. Naomi is one of the girls that was actually put under his wing. He was an amazing person. He had this fashion empire and manufacturing. He manufactured home decor and was very forward thinking. He recruited all these 12-year-old working class Parisian girls, and he taught them the decorative arts. He hired teachers. He put them in an atelier, taught them all these skills, and they emerged being able to earn good livings. And also they were just, his belief was that the working class has all this untapped artistic talent.
Which was an amazing thinking.
It really was. It was amazing. And he at some point he had 360 employees, and he would have hired these 3 chefs who would make wonderful meals for them. And he took them on outings in nature and to the park, to stimulate their imaginations. He was kind of marvelous. So this group was called the Martines, which is, it was named after one of Paul Poiret's daughters. And they were real. So I just made one of my characters, one of the Martines, who was making art. And then Olga, Olga is I am the most invested in Olga. I've got to say, Olga imagines herself a kind of heroine, and she's very moved by the story of the Little Mermaid. And she goes out into the flood of 1910 to rescue the books that are floating by in the Seine. And Olga she's a feminist before feminism was much of a thing. So I do love Olga, and Olga, comes very, well, I won't say more about that. I don't want to give it away.
She's quite intelligent too.
Yeah.
Quite the intellectual and reads a lot. And
Yeah. She's an early reader.
yes.
Yeah.
Loves knowing facts. And
yeah.
She was fun.
And then Bela, the youngest, is she loves dance, and her aunt Jeanette decides to groom her in her image to become a dancer. So she takes on her training, and then both of them wind up dancing as extras for the Ballets Russes.
Which is really a fun part of the story. So I love the way you tie real characters and real stories, and you've mentioned the designer, but talk about some of the other real personalities that you've included.
Absolutely. Just the Belle Époque, which is this period of time, involved the greatest artists, composers, writers, dancers, painters of the early 20th century. They were all there. Picasso, Jean Cocteau, Stravinsky, I have a whole chapter devoted to the 1913 debut of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which is it was an amazing event. It was a ballet and this orchestral work that were launched in this theater, and there was a riot. The music was so weird to everyone's ears, and the dancers were doing such weird non-balletic things, and the costumes didn't show off their beautiful bodies at all. And the audience went mad. They actually went mad. They started challenging one another to duels. Women were hitting people on the head with their umbrellas. Men were pulling each other's beards. It was really unbelievable. And for Sonia, it turns into a great incident of PTSD for the 1903 pogrom in Kishinev, in which she lost everything, her husband and her livelihood. So it was wonderful to research these things and then find the story suggested itself within those events. The 1910 flood of Paris, which is so reminiscent of the floods we've had in our world lately, with global warming, just devastating floods where the whole city of Paris was changed. And then the Russian flu, which was so like our own pandemic, and how one character I was able to truthfully report, right before he died, he lost his sense of taste and smell. It was the same thing, so the history, even though it's a long time ago, it's remote, it's really, really relevant, all of it.
Very relevant. It was fun how you tied it together. I really did enjoy that part of reading the book. So there at the end, we've talked about how Sonia's mother makes a confession on her deathbed. And that kind of brings me to, there were some secrets kept in the family. And maybe you could talk for a minute about the impact of keeping those secrets.
Well, I'm not going to divulge the secrets
No.
because for those who haven't read the book, but family secrets. I'm fascinated by that. I think that there's something that I call received history, and that's our family history that our family members tell us and that the photographs tell us. But scratch the surface of any family, and there are usually a lot of secrets, and they're very important. They're telling secrets. They explain a lot. And I believe that these secrets and the pain that's carried with them can be carried down through the generations. And I think that's true. I think it's really true for all of us. I mean, look at the history of slavery in this country, how the shame and the secrets express themselves now, how they've sabotaged so much. It's really, I guess I'm a big believer in truth and reconciliation, like let's let out the secrets, let's tell our truth. And, at the age of 68 now, I feel like I've got nothing to hide except the secrets in my novel that you haven't read yet, but I really, this is my life, and these are my beliefs about what's important, what's beautiful, what I want to share, what I have to share. So, why hide anything? It's wonderful. I mean, after writing for such a long time and being alone, when you write, it's beautiful to share with readers. It's really a magical sort of thing to connect with readers, to read the words you've written and to see people hearing them and receiving them. Very special.
That's why we love to read. And thankfully, there are people like you who love to write. So keep us fed. I'd like to move a little bit into some more personal things about you. Like if you could talk about your writing style, how do you typically approach your writing? I don't know. We talked about this a little bit at dinner. I think that's why you do.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, people often ask, well, do you write at a computer? Do you write in a notebook? Or, do you write at a desk? And I said, I get down on my knees. I poke a pen in my vein and I just let it all run out. I mean, it is kind of like that. I mean, I do write by hand in notebooks. All my first drafts of my poetry and my fiction and my journal entries, they're all in the same notebooks. And for Vivaldi's Virgins, which, has now been around since 2007, there are certain scenes in that book, like the death of Sister Laura, one of the, main characters. When I went back to my notebook where I first wrote it with a fountain pen, it's word for word as the scene came out when it was published. So, sometimes things they just arrive like in packages from the ether, and it's so magic. And it happens, with the best poems. They just arrive.
I bet they do. So we're all very curious about your mini-series, and you said you had some news today. So tell us.
Well, about a year and a half ago, I got a note on my website from someone who said she was a producer in LA, and Michelle Burke. And she said, oh, I'm in love with your novel, Vivaldi's Virgins. And I was wondering if, the rights are available. I would love to see it made into a mini series. And I said, twist my arm. But so we are on this journey together. Her production company, Lotus Productions, optioned the book. And I'm written into the contract as consulting writer. And there's to be a title card in the miniseries. It says, based on the book by Barbara Quick. And I'm bound and determined to go to Venice, where the story takes place. I want to read for a bit part. It takes place in the Ospedale della Pietà, the 18th century foundling home in Venice, where Antonio Vivaldi was the resident music master and priest. And I'm going to read, see what happens. But yeah, right before I left my home tonight, I wrote her a note. I said, Michelle, do you have any updates? Because, I'm going to be at this event tonight, and it would be great to give, a shout out to the project. And she said, I was just going to write to you. I don't know how much I really can divulge. I mean, she had given the book to a very well-known writer who's worked on some really big movies. And, it was like a wait and see thing. And she told me tonight, he's definitely on board. And then there's this wonderful actress who is now, so it's like they're putting it together. They're putting the pieces together, attaching the talent, and then, they'll go out and get funding. And these things take forever. So, it could take 10 years. I don't know how much time it'll take, but she's wonderful. Michelle is passionate and determined, and this is her focus. So I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be wonderful. I think it would work really well for a miniseries, and I love the characters like my own children. So
All exciting and fun, and we wish you the best with that. We'll have to stay tuned.
Thank you.
So we talked about the poetry, and I know you're very passionate about that. Can you just talk a little bit about your work? You mentioned a few things at dinner, some even scientific journals have published some of your work, and it's kind of fun too.
Well, last year, do you know the program, the Writer's Almanac, that Garrison Keillor? Well, he doesn't do any new poems anymore, but he was last year. And last year, for whatever wonderful reason, his curator and he just fell in love with my work, which was just unbelievable. And he performed 5 of my poems on the Writer's Almanac. He recorded them. And on the basis of the performance of one of those, I was contacted on my website by the poetry editor of Scientific American, who's a wonderful, wonderful writer named Davis Sobel, who wrote Longitude and Galileo's Daughter. She's just fabulous, fabulous writer. So she wrote to me and asked if they could have a poem of mine for Scientific American. Again, I twist my arm, So that came out in May. It was a full-page spread, and it's based on based on my son's work, which is the subject matter is called Optimization Under Uncertainty. He's a mathematician. He's working in Denmark now, and I think it's the most wonderful metaphor for life. Optimization under uncertainty. It's what we're all trying to do, right?
That says a very large amount about life. You're right. Yes. And you said, you do identify really as a poetess.
Not as a poetess, but as a poet. It's definitely, it's what has saved me since the age of 9. I came from a really troubled family. My family of origin was a friggin' nightmare. It really was. And what got me through was reading and writing. Libraries. I would go to the library and I would just, take out a stack of books like this. And that's what got me through the week. And I began writing. I wrote my first poem when I was 9. And I remember a line from it. It's very revealing. Far into the night, I see myself. I am alone.
Oh,
It was very, I cried a lot. I was sad a lot, but poetry saved me, and it still saves me. It saves me. It's the magic doorway. It makes me feel connected to what is beautiful and what is important.
That's great. What are you working on now?
Poetry. I have one poetry chapbook that it won the 2020 Blue Light Press Prize, and was published, and it's back there. It's called The Light on Sifnos, and it's poems from a particular Greek island, magical place. And I'm putting together my first full-length collection of poetry, so who knows when that will be out, but it's exciting. And I'm suddenly, after having been a lone wolf for decades as a writer, I really have these communities now. I'm part of the poetry writing community in the Bay Area and belong beyond, and part of the fiction writing community in a very wonderful way. So I don't know how this happened. It's kind of magic, but it's so wonderful to feel like far into the night I see myself and I'm not alone anymore. It's very wonderful. And I'm such a happy person, and I'm very optimistic. I'm ridiculous. I'm a ridiculous romantic and optimist, and I love people, and I love nature and gardening and dancing and cooking. So I'm a very ridiculous, kind of idiotically happy person. I love writing. It's very exciting. I love sharing with readers. So I'm happy.
That's very nice. Well, with that, I'd love to open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions for this author? Yes, I'm going to repeat them just because we're doing Zoom.
I'm interested to know if you've ever read your own book Audible.
Oh, okay, good question.
It's such a wonderful
Oh,
word. And I love I can
thank you so much. I would love to do it. I've thought about it a lot. I was a theater major, my major as a kid, from the age of 9 to the age of 17. I had a lot of theater training. I love it. And it was only when I realized I would be a failure as a film actress or a stage actress that I thought, well, what can I do? Well, I've always written. But Vivaldi's Virgins was made into a wonderful audiobook. It's by Blackstone. It's so good. Cassandra Campbell narrates it. And actually my husband, who's a violist in the San Francisco Symphony, and one of his colleagues, a wonderful Russian violist, put a soundtrack down on the audiobook. So it's Blackstone. I would love, write to Blackstone, tell them, please. No, really, I mean it. That's the way things get done, because I don't have any power to do it. Tell them you want an audiobook of What Disappears. I would narrate it for free. I mean, I enjoy reading my book. I would love it. I would love to read it to you. Well, you're listening to your audiobook. It would be a great privilege. So that would be great.
Yeah, a good question. Thank you for that. Anyone else have a question? Yes. Let's repeat that. I'm going to repeat it just because our Zoom visitors can't hear. So the question is about your family, which you've mentioned, and do you have other family members who kind of worked their way into the characters of your book?
Well, yes. I mean, actually, there was a long period of time between starting this novel when I was 21, and it just took place in Russia, and the Ballets Russes had nothing to do with it. All I knew was that Nana would say that twice a year, her mother, a seamstress, would take the train to Paris to look at the fashions. And her mother was a seamstress, made the hats and coats for the local parochial school. And I was like, why did she have to go to Paris, to see the fashions? It made no sense to me. I couldn't figure out a reason, because it would be dangerous, it would be expensive. And then about 10 years ago, I have one older brother and one much younger sister, 9 years younger, and she decided to cut me out of her life. And it was kind of like one of these moments, like, let me get that knife out of my heart. But suddenly I realized what reason would be compelling enough to make a simple Jewish seamstress take the train to Paris at great expense and danger twice a year. She was looking for her sister. She was looking for her lost sister. So I made my sister and me twins, which probably would annoy my sister. She was terribly annoyed with, the last time I saw her when somebody said, who's older? It was awful. But I love my sister. I wish her well, but I don't even know where she is, and she wants nothing to do with me. So I got to rewrite the story and make it come out differently, where these two sisters are holding hands in the middle of the night and telling each other their deepest secrets. And it was healing for me. That's one of the reasons I like being a writer. I get to make the stories come out differently.
Sure, give them good endings. Any other questions? Yes, Robin. Oh, Robin wants her to tell the wonderful story about Jessica Mitford.
Do you know who Jessica Mitford was? Oh, goody. Okay, so when my first novel, Northern Edge, won the Discover Great New Writers Prize, little did I know that I wouldn't be discovered for decades, but the publisher said, you have to get some famous writers to write jacket quotes for you. And I said, well, I don't know any famous writers. And he said, well, go out and meet some. So at the time, my then husband and I were living in Berkeley, and he had read that Jessica Mitford and her husband, Bob Truhaft, were doing some sort of fundraising thing for a restaurant in Berkeley. I was visibly pregnant with my first child and my only child. And I went up to her. I walked up to them at their table and I was wringing my hands and I said, excuse me, Ms. Mitford, I've written a novel and my publisher wants me to get some jacket quotes, and I was wondering if you might be kind enough to read it. And she said, oh no, I don't do that. And she was sitting next to the person I later found out was her very best friend, who nudged her in the ribs and said, oh, Decca, have a heart. And Decca rolled her eyes and said, oh, all right. So she gave me her address. I sent her the manuscript. I think I actually dropped it off. And I heard from her a couple of weeks later. She said, I absolutely loved it. Here's a quote for you. I hope it's all right. And will you and your husband come to dinner at our house? We were living on a 30-foot sailboat at the time. And really, they fed us for, years until her death. So, I mean, we would eat there a lot. They were wonderfully hospitable and kind. She gave a party for my first book. She would call people up. She called up Herb Gold and said, you have to review this book. She would bully people. She was the best advocate. She was a wonderful, wonderful mentor.
Great story. Another question? Well, it's almost 8 o'clock. We've got a couple more minutes. But I want to give people a chance to purchase the book if they'd like. You've got not only What Disappears, but your other books are back there. So if anyone's interested, I'm sure you'd be happy to sign copies.
You betcha.
Okay.
I love signing books and I love inscribing them, meeting the readers. It's very exciting. Thank you so much for coming out. And thank you so much to Friends of the Lafayette Library and their wonderful, wonderful volunteers for this delightful interview and the dinner, and to Arinda Books. Support your local independent bookstore. This is our life's blood. And I know you're all devoted readers, and thank you for being who you are. That's really a pleasure.
Thank you for being with us.